seems like the administration is simply walking into court and telling a federal court they can't look at the evidence, they can't stop what they're doing, and we see constant public statements from administration officials criticizing federal judges, saying they don't have authority. I think we're on dangerous ground here in the United States.
The legal fight surrounding the Trump administration's use of an 18th century wartime law to deport migrants is quickly escalating into a battle over power between the executive and judicial branches. President Trump and his allies are blasting a federal judge who ordered the pause of deportation flights of undocumented Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador. The White House disputes accusations. It ignored the court order, claiming planes carrying migrants departed U.S. soil prior to the judge's written order. Trump and Elon Musk now calling for the judge overseeing the case to be impeached, a move that caught the attention of Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, who in a rare statement pushed back on the threats. Joining me now is the Hill's courts and legal reporter Zach Schonfeld with more. Zach, President Trump and Elon Musk have been publicly calling for the impeachment of U.S. District Judge James Boasberg, and today articles of impeachment were filed by Texas Congressman Brandon Gill. It's highly unlikely they'd get the two-thirds votes needed in the Senate to remove this judge, but talk of the impeachment prompting a response from Justice Roberts. He issued a statement today that reads in part, quote, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision." Zach, pretty extraordinary to hear from Roberts on this issue. What do you make of that?
Extraordinary indeed, Drew. I think even beyond what is the words there in those few sentences, just the fact that the Chief Justice felt the need to speak out at all says volumes. This is quite a rare occurrence. The only time I can think of where we've seen something like this occurred during Trump's first White House term, when at the time he too at that point had been criticizing a judge who had ruled against him on immigration issues. And Chief Justice Roberts there too had issued a rare statement rebuking Trump. So now he's done it a second time now that Trump has been back in the White House, but really just says a lot. You don't see these types of public statements from the Supreme Court Chief Justice. This is not some court ruling or some order or an opinion. This is just a flat out public statement that the Chief Justice felt the need to issue.
Back to the case at hand, on Monday, Judge Boasberg questioned the Trump administration about whether it had ignored his order to turn planes around carrying those migrants, giving the Justice Department until noon today to respond with information about the flights. Have we heard back from the Trump administration?
We have, and the bottom line of this filing is they do not want to hand over this information, which isn't too much of a surprise. They had signaled that they would not be turning it over at yesterday's hearing. And the administration here is making 2 different arguments about why they believe they don't have to hand over this information about those flights. The first argument is the fact that they believe that there are national security and foreign policy implications, and they are concerned not really necessarily about the judge seeing this, but really about it coming out into public view. Now, I should say that the judge has told the Justice Department that if it comes down to it, he's willing to go into a classified facility to get access to the information if that's what it needs to be. And then the second argument that the administration makes is that they don't believe that they have violated this judge's order at all. They say whether it's the oral order or the written order, that these planes that had traveled to Honduras and then El Salvador on Saturday night were already outside of U.S. territory by the time the judge issued his ruling. So they said if the purpose of trying to get these timings is to figure out whether they occurred after the judge's rulings, they say there's no need because they didn't. So those are the 2 arguments.
Court order and timing of the flights aside, the White House says it does believe it's on solid legal ground when using this wartime law to justify the deportations. Let's take a listen to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt.
This administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority granted to him under the Alien Enemies Act. We are quite confident in that, and we are wholly confident that we are going to win this case in court.
Okay, so this is an 18th century law. Has the scope of the law ever been tested in the courts?
Well, this is a law that has only been invoked 3 times before and has been invoked in times of war. So this law has not been invoked very much, and we certainly haven't seen it being invoked in decades. So it will be the first time in a long time that the courts have had to grapple with this. And the administration has taken the position that they believe that these determinations that the president is making here, essentially saying that he views this as an invasion, that under the Alien Enemies Act, they don't believe that this is an issue that the courts can review. So one of their arguments is here is, beyond the actual merits of these deportations, they say the judges just don't have authority to get involved here in the first place. So this is an argument that we expect to see them make to the DC Circuit this week, but potentially the Supreme Court eventually.
And in other legal news, the Trump administration has begun taking steps to reinstate thousands of fired probationary workers after a federal judge ruled determinations were unlawful. How sweeping is the ruling, and where does the case go from here?
The ruling was pretty sweeping in terms of how many agencies it covers. There was actually 2 rulings here, one right after the other last week. One judge had ordered that probationary employees be reinstated at 6 different federal agencies. And then hours later, we got a ruling in another case from a separate judge ruling that employees had to be reinstated at 18 different federal agencies. So we're talking about thousands of workers here. And now the Trump administration has represented in court that those probationary workers are indeed being reinstated. I will just note that there is still a question of exactly what their status now is. According to some reporting that my colleague Rachel Friesen did, that many of these employees are being reinstated, but they're being put on paid leave. So it's a dynamic that we're continuing to watch this week, is whether the judges are content with that, of some of these employees apparently being on paid leave and not fully returning to their job duties.
And the Supreme Court has taken up challenges to Trump's executive order aimed at ending birthright citizenship. Where does that case stand?
So at this point, the court has set a briefing schedule, and this is an emergency case. This is not following the normal trajectory where this goes to oral arguments and the case takes many months. This is an emergency application that's just handled on the papers. But I can tell you from the schedule that the justices have set here, they're not really viewing this too much as an urgent emergency. The response deadline for the plaintiffs in these cases to respond to the Trump administration isn't for about 2 more weeks, which is the court in many other emergency applications has acted much quicker. So it's just a tea leaf, but if anything, it really does signal that the court isn't acting on these cases with much urgency.
Okay, and finally, before I let you go, the Supreme Court is expected to release decisions this Friday. Anything we should be watching for?
We never know what decisions are going to come down in advance. The court tells us that Friday is likely to be an opinion day. We just don't know which of their dozens of pending cases is going to come down. But one that I'm really watching in particular as we get to this opinion day is this big battle over gender-affirming care bans. This was a case that got a lot of attention when it went to oral arguments last December. This was a challenge that had been brought by the Biden administration, arguing that these Republican legislatures that have banned gender-affirming care for transgender minors, that is unconstitutional. But the question now has become, now that we've had a change in administration, the Trump administration, as you might imagine, does not hold the same legal views that the Biden administration did on this issue, whether the Supreme Court is actually going to move ahead towards an actual ruling in this case, or whether they're now going to toss it because the Trump administration has abandoned the challenge that the Biden administration brought. So certainly that's one decision that we're watching for. But like I said, there are dozens of pending cases, so it really could be anything.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much, Zach.
Thanks, Drew.
And make sure to go to thehill.com and sign up for the Gavel weekly newsletter to keep up to date on the latest court cases playing out across the U.S. President Trump taking a different approach to his mass deportation plans, encouraging immigrants living in the country to self-deport. Take a listen.
My administration is launching the CBP Home app to give people in our country illegally an easy way to leave now and self-deport voluntarily. If they do, they could potentially have the opportunity to return legally at some point in the future. But if they do not avail themselves of this opportunity, then they will be found, they will be deported, and they will never be admitted again to the United States, ever again. You're never coming in.
The president announcing the new Customs and Border Protection app Monday, replacing the Biden-era CBP One app, which allowed migrants to easily claim asylum and schedule appointments at points of entry. It's a homecoming 9 months in the making. 2 astronauts stranded aboard the International Space Station are finally returning home after the Boeing Starliner capsule thrusters failed on their test flight to the ISS last June. News Nation's Brian Enton is at the Kennedy Space Center awaiting splashdown and has more.
I mean, just imagine what it must feel like for Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams right now. They were supposed to be on this 8-day mission to space, and they've been up there for 286 days, almost 9 months at the space station. You remember what happened. Basically, the Boeing Starliner had some maintenance issues, was not able to bring them back, so they ended up essentially being stuck up there. Now the Dragon, the SpaceX Dragon, was able to make it up, dock with the space station while we were asleep around 1 a.m. It actually undocked with the astronauts on board and all of their space gear, and now they will begin the 17-hour journey back here to Earth. It's interesting the way it all goes down. Once they enter the Earth's atmosphere, they begin to descend. There's this series of parachutes that will deploy, and then the hope is, and the plan is, that the capsule will slowly come down and land in the ocean off the west coast of Florida. Once the capsule drifts down, touches down in the water, there's a ship that will go out, a SpaceX NASA ship. They use a crane to bring the capsule up onto the deck of the ship. Then they open the door, and that is when the astronauts are able to get out. Usually they need some help getting off of the capsule, because remember, 9 months in space, gravity can really, not having gravity can really have an impact. We're told that they'll be flown to Houston then to be checked out by a team of doctors. Something as simple as holding a pen, former astronauts say, can be very, very difficult. So the screenings, the health procedures are all very important before they will finally be reunited with their families again after 9 months in space. Back to you.
Thank you, Brian Enton. NASA says splashdown is expected this evening just before 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You may have to get a new ID to board a plane. In today's Political Minute, News Nation Chief Washington correspondent and host of The Hill, Blake Berman, details a new travel requirement that will soon go into effect nationwide.
If you're traveling this year, you might want to check your ID. I'm Blake Berman, host of The Hill on News Nation. Summer is just around the corner, which means more Americans will be boarding flights to take vacations across the country. But soon, you will need what's known as a real ID to board a plane in the U.S. If you don't have one, you may need to provide another form of identification, like a passport. So what's a real ID? Well, Congress passed the Real ID Act in 2005 in light of the September 11th terrorist attacks. The law established a national standard for states to issue IDs. It will be enforced starting on May 7th. To obtain a real ID, you'll need documentation that shows your full name, date of birth, social security number, 2 proofs of address, and your lawful status. Now, many states already have implemented measures for years, so check your wallet. If there's a star on your ID, you're covered. I'm Blake Berman, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
And you can find more news and analysis from Blake and our colleagues 24/7 on News Nation. To find News Nation on your screen, go to joinnn.com. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.